Good morning. We'll bring the conference committee on the Education Finance Omnibus bill to order. And it's very good to see everyone. I hope everyone had an enjoyable and restful break, and we're ready to get back to work and get a final bill produced. And so I thought maybe we should begin by each Senator Nelson and I saying a little something, and then allow everyone to introduce themselves, and we'll include the staff in that. You're all an integral part of what we do here. So with that, I am Representative Jennifer Loon, Chair of the House Education Finance Committee, representing Eden Prairie. And this is my 5th term in the legislature, and I'm very honored to be here and starting us off here today on our conference committee process. I'll make just a couple of comments about the House bill, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Nelson for any comments she wishes to make about the Senate bill. And then again, we'll commence with introductions. So the House bill, and it's House File HF890, provides overall a $1.1 billion increase in education spending over the previous biennium, and that's about 6.5%. And this is our bill, the House bill, is a $273 million increase above the projected base, and most of that increase is applied to the basic formula. And actually, that's a priority that both the House and the Senate bill embody. The House version dedicates more than 80% of our base revenue increase to the per pupil basic formula and to compensatory revenue. And I think if there's one message we have all heard, legislators loud and clear from our school districts, it's to prioritize money on the formula. And that is the money that they use to fund their priorities and to do with as they see to best fit the needs of their school, their students, and their communities. The House bill also continues our commitment to proven early learning strategies with increased funding for scholarships, and is really what has become called the Minnesota model by other states around the nation, looking at what we're doing, which is providing targeted support to those young learners most in need while preserving parent engagement and choice. We've also got some great provisions in this bill to address the need for more and more diverse teachers in our classrooms. And we do that through some key programs and policy reforms. And to attract new teachers into the teaching profession, to try to diversify our teaching ranks. And we also address the seniority-based teacher retention policy that does make it more difficult to attract and retain new teachers. There are also some key provisions in here that are more policy-oriented, but I think they're important. One would be Representative Bennett's provision to try to protect our children from child sexual abuse, which is certainly an epidemic we've been hearing a lot about, and also a provision that was authored by Representative Fenton that would assure that drinking water in our schools is safe. And there's been a lot of attention to that issue as well. So through the priorities embodied in the House bill, we are hoping to empower our schools with more discretionary funding and autonomy over how to utilize those funds, again, to the best needs of those local school districts and the students that they serve. We want to continue to empower parents with early learning scholarships so that they can choose programs best suited to the needs of their children, and to empower our communities to be strong education partners in making sure that we are educating our children to the best of their ability and to the strength of our state as a whole. And so with that, I would be pleased to recognize Senator Nelson.
Well, thank you, Chair Loon. It's great to be here with you today and get started on certainly what many of us think is our future, and that is the E12 Finance and Policy Conference Committee. We know how important our work here is to the future that our students will have and the strength that they will bring to our state. It's nice to be back here in room 200 in the state office building. I started here in this conference room when I was on education policy as a House member many years ago with some who are here at the table today. And it's wonderful to be serving in the Senate now in this role as well. I'm a daughter of two public educators. My dad was my high school principal. That was a story that we can talk about at some point. It was interesting when guys were dating the principal's daughter, I will say. And then my mother was a special education teacher, and I'm a former teacher as well. Have taught special education, 8th grade reading, and Title I in elementary and secondary schools. So we know how important our work is here today. Many of the things that Rep. Loon mentioned are also in the Senate bill. I'll just give you a little flavor of the Senate bill that we'll be conferencing and start conferencing today. The Senate education E12 target was $300 million over the projected budget forecast. The Senate focused 95% or 90% of that increased funding on the formula allowance. We increased the formula allowance to 1.5% in each year of the biennium as a carryover. And of course, this did not impact any of the linked-in or the linked formulas that are tied to the per pupil formula. It was a straight up 1.5% formula increase. The Senate bill also fully funded the following forecasted items and their growth. We know that enrollment will grow at about 35,000 additional students. Obviously, those funds are in the Senate bill as well as the House bill too, I'm sure. Special education growth in numbers and services. There's an additional $330 million over current special education funding. The debt service aid, which helps districts pay off construction bonds, is estimated to increase by $4 million. And projected increase in contact hours for adult basic education will also be covered at a cost of $4.6 million additional, as are the projected increases in the demand for our school food programs. That's an additional $5.4 million. One of the things that we must make sure we do is make good on our promises that we've started in the past. And that would involve the complete phase-in of the long-term facilities maintenance program, which was initially started, and now the bulk of the funding needs to come in starting in this biennium. $131 million of additional funding to complete that promise on an ongoing basis. The E12 Senate budget forecast alone would add $840 million for the upcoming biennium, taking our cost from $17.43 billion to $18.27 billion for the upcoming biennium. That is a 4.8% increase in funding over the current biennium. Then the Senate bill adds the additional budget target on top of that of $300 million for the upcoming biennium. So that would be a total of $18.57 billion, which is a 6.5% increase. And I should say that spending in the tails at the Senate target is $435 million. Just as an aside, with the exception of one small local adjustment in school property taxes, levy adjustments, the forecast for what schools are expected to receive under current law remains the same, which is $2.69 billion in 18 and $2.87 billion in 19. In addition, we'll spend the rest of the day going through both of these bills, but let me just say that if you look at the Senate bill in total, you will find that it is focused on per student funding and local control. We look at results-driven solutions, things such as the Reading Corps and doing some special targeting and focusing on dyslexia, educational tactics. And then we have some great rural and urban grant initiatives. And again, it's a historic level of investment. So even with that, I know that we will have challenges because we cannot fund every good thing that needs to be funded. And so that's our work in front of us. And I look forward to getting started. And I would like, we'll have our members introduce themselves.
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson. And I appreciate you highlighting a few more of some of the specifics, because I know we do have a lot of common goals shared between the House and the Senate bill. And I think that bodes well for a good start to our conference process. So thank you and your committee for all your good work. We appreciate it. So with that, why don't we go ahead and we'll start with the Senate. And if you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, and staff, you're included in that too. So please introduce yourselves.
Hello, my name is Greg Marcus. I am a committee administrator with the Senate E12 Finance Committee.
Eric Pratt. I represent Senate District 55, which is Scott County, the school districts of Prior Lake, Shakopee, and Jordan. And I'm chairman of the Education Policy Committee.
Ed Cook, I'm a researcher with the Senate Republican Caucus.
Jenna Larson, I'm the Senate E12 Fiscal Analyst.
Bjorn Arneson, Senate Nonpartisan Legislative Analyst.
Anne-Marie Butler, Senate Counsel.
Senator Bill Weber, Senate District 22 in the southwest corner of the state, and representing 20-some different school districts out of my district. So,
Chuck Uyghur, District 43, North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale, White Bear, Matamidi, Birchwood, Willarney, representing 4 districts. I'm in my 21st year.
Senator Justin Eichhorn. I represent Senate District 5, which is Itasca, Cass, Beltrami, and a little bit of Hubbard. And I am Vice Chair of the Education Policy Committee.
Dana Elling, Senate DFL Research.
All right, Representative Murphy, do you want to start us off over here?
I'm Representative Mary Murphy, District 3B, which goes from Proctor to 2 harbors around Duluth and including 2 precincts of Duluth, 5 school districts.
Mars Beltrandi, Redquist, House DFL Research.
Ron Crecia, District 9B. I have almost all of Morrison County and then 5 counties in Long Prairie. I think I represent 12 school districts.
I'm Peggy Bennett. I represent 27A, Albert Lee being the largest city down there, and quite a number of school districts overlap into my district.
Representative Sandra Erickson, Chair of Education Innovation Policy here in the House, and I represent cities in East Central Minnesota, including the school districts of Princeton, Mille Lacs, Ogilvie, Onamia, and Isle.
Andrew Hassett, Committee Administrator for the Education Innovation Policy Committee in the House.
Doreen Kynes, Committee Legislative Assistant for the Education Finance Committee.
Christina Pera from Nonpartisan House Research.
Amy Roberts, House Republican Research.
Emily Adrians, House Fiscal Staff.
I'm Tim Strom from House Research.
Harry Kennedy, Committee Administrator for the House Education Finance Committee.
All right, well, again, thank you all so much. Look forward to a very productive conference committee, and very pleased to have all of you working with Senator Nelson and I as co-leads in this effort. So with that, if there are no questions before we start, I think the plan for today is to start the walkthrough. And so we'll have nonpartisan staff do walkthrough of the side-by-sides of the bill. And then we'll have the fiscal staff go through the spreadsheets. And then how I'd like to proceed with the side-by-side is if any members have questions, just go ahead and raise your hand or get my attention, and we'll ask questions as the staff goes along. So we'll address questions as they come up. And then if there... I think the plan, too, is that we will not do the side-by-side on the licensure issue at this time. And so we'll set that aside for now and go through the side-by-side on the other provisions. And then I would hope that we would get, it's my plan to get to public testimony, particularly from the commissioner who has arranged her schedule to be here with us today, and we truly appreciate that. So that would be the plan for today, and I don't know if we'll have time for more than that, but we'll see how the conference progresses. So with that, if there's no other questions or anything anybody's wondering about, we will go ahead and proceed with the side-by-side. And whoever is planning to lead that off, is that you, Mr. Strom? All right.
Madam Chair, members, Mr. Aronson and I will start with Article 1. I'd like to point out a couple of documents in your book that will be helpful for you.
There's a bill comparison summary at the front of your folders. The bills that are lined up in this summary include the Senate version of House File 890, which is identified as the first unofficial engrossment. For purposes of this conference committee, the Senate is on the left in both the summary and in the side-by-side language from the revisers. And then that document is lined up against the House, which is on the right, and the House's version is House File 890, the fourth engrossment. And as well, House File 140, the teacher licensure bill, is included in this side-by-side comparison. As the chair just mentioned, I don't believe we'll be talking about Article 3 today, but just so that members know, those provisions are on both the House and the Senate side included in this draft as well. The bills, in addition to the bill summary, there's the wonderful language the revisor's office has put together for us with, again, the Senate bill on the left and the House bill on the right. This year, the revisers added a new function that I think we're going to find quite helpful, and that is that the reviser's side-by-side uses shading to highlight those parts of the language that are different. So if an element shows up on either the House or the Senate side with shading, it means that that portion of the language is different from each other, that the House and Senate differ there. So hopefully that'll make it easier for members to spot the differences. I know in some years members have preferred to work off the summary, and in more recent years, I think members in this conference committee have preferred to work off the reviser's side-by-side language. So that's what I'll be doing today in terms of the page and line numbers as we go through this document.
All right, Mr. Strom, and I think Senator Nelson.
Sure. Well, just on the Senate side, we realize our Senate documents do not have the shading. So that is something we can get if found necessary, but you must have some very funky printers over here that do some very special things. But I think anything that helps identify those areas where we have some differences, I think is important. So we'll look forward to getting that ready.
Yes, and I think our committee administrator, Ms. Kynes, indicated we have extra copies, so we'll get those for Senator.
Thank you very much. That will be helpful.
Counterparts right now. All right.
Madam Chair, if you're ready, then we'll start on the section.
Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Krisha.
Thank you. Just a quick procedural thing. If there's any language that's identical, are we going to adopt it right away, or what is your process?
Thank you, Representative Krisha. Not today. Today we'll just do the walkthrough, but and that would probably be one of the early things we would look at doing once we've gone through all the materials and answered questions and that, but probably not today.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, Mr. Strom.
And Madam Chair, members, I'll start with the side-by-side reviser's language then for Article 1. And again, at the top of the document on the left side, it'll have the Senate reference at the top of each page as well as the article reference. And on the right side will be the House language. So, Madam Chair, members, if you go to page R1 for the e-learning days, you'll see that in Section 1 of the Senate bill and Section 2 of Article 2 of the House bill, that those sections are identical. In Section 2, this also deals with e-learning days, and here there's a little bit of difference in the language. Section 2 of the Senate, I'll let the Senate speak to the change that's different than the House. Essentially, the House provision addresses the ability of a school district to have up to 5 e-learning days in one school year.
And Madam Chair, on the Senate side, Section 2, the similar provision would make some clarification that a district would not necessarily be required to have an e-learning day if the district's sort of calendar made some allowance for expected snow days. And similarly, in subdivision 2 of the Senate language, the language, though quite similar, is different in some respects about how the district or the school board specifically must negotiate or consult with the exclusive representative of the teachers regarding the e-learning day plan. On page R2, you'll see some differences in subdivisions 2, 3, 4, and 5 for the e-learning days. The Senate language would require the district to take into consideration needs of students eligible for free or reduced price lunch in developing their e-learning day plan, and require that a student's teacher be accessible online and by school voicemail during normal school hours. Going forward, Section 3 on the Senate side originates from the agency bill. It would provide some clarification about the use of asthma inhalers in schools. On the bottom of page R3, Section 5, regarding non-public pupil aids, clarifies that for the purposes of calculating non-public pupil aid, textbook would include an online book with an annual subscription cost. And that language is identical in both the House and Senate bills. Page R4, Section 6, clarifies, again for the purposes of non-public pupil aids, that software or other educational technology would include AP course registration fees for AP courses delivered online. And that's identical in the House and Senate files. Section 9 on the Senate side relates to school reporting of utility consumption data into the Minnesota B3 benchmarking program. This comes from a Senator Goggin bill. Section 10 on the Senate side comes from the agency bill. The new language is actually on page R7, and it's identical in both the House and Senate, and it clarifies the calculation of transportation special education aid for students in a shelter care facility. On page R8, the Senate provides some modification to the program requirements for voluntary pre-kindergarten program providers. And the language that is stricken and inserted here originally came from the agency policy bill. Section 12 on the bottom of page R9 is the same in both bills, and again relates to the e-learning day proposal described earlier in this article.
Madam Chair, members, on page R10 on the right side, on the House side of the document, Section 6 is another change to the definition of average daily membership, and this change can be seen on lines 8.8 and 8.9. Essentially what's happening here is that the House is proposing that that students who are attending certain kinds of extended day programs that will be listed in Section 8, that they qualify for additional average daily membership according to the provisions of Section 8. Section 7 of the House bill is the formula allowance. The House sets its formula allowance increase at 1.25% per year, or $6,143 for fiscal year 18 and $6,220 for fiscal year 19.
Madam Chair, the Senate similarly proposes a formula allowance increase of $91 in each of fiscal 18 and 19, and that amounts to a roughly 1.5% increase in each of those fiscal years.
Madam Chair, members, on page R11, Section 8, the extended time revenue definition is expanded, and this goes with the change that was in Section 6. And essentially, this was a bill that Representative Baker brought to the committee concerning the Wilmer School District. There are two care and treatment facilities within that district, the Prairie Lakes Education Center and the Lake Park School. And neither of those, because the students are not there voluntarily, neither of those facilities qualifies for extended time revenue. And in order for the facilities to claim extended time revenue for the summer session for those students, new statutory language is added. So that's the new paragraph B that shows up on page R11 on bill lines 8.22 to 8.32. Madam Chair, members, Section 9 then is a change to compensatory revenue. There are two changes in the House bill. The first of those is taking the pilot compensatory revenue sites and adding those to the ongoing compensatory education revenue. Those 7 school districts that qualify for the pilot site revenue would receive their baseline level of funding permanently, and for the next 5 years would receive 75% of the increase over baseline that was provided to those districts for fiscal years 16 and 17. The second part of the House change to compensatory revenue consists of two different changes. The first of those is to delink compensatory revenue from the general education formula allowance, and the second part of that is to create a new targeted compensatory revenue, which is referenced in this section. And that new targeted revenue we'll talk about in two more sections. But essentially what's happening here is the House is delinking future growth in compensatory revenue from the basic formula allowance and instead providing the slight more, roughly the same amount of revenue through the new targeted compensatory revenue, which will show up in section 11.
Madam Chair, back to page R11, similarly to the House, the Senate proposes to make permanent the amount of the compensatory pilot grant that was made available to the 7 districts. The Senate proposes to make the fiscal 17 amount permanent, which would have, which in total it was about $7.3 million for that fiscal year.
Madam Chair, members, in Section 10 of the House bill on page R12, the operating capital equalizing factor is adjusted a small amount, and this is to keep the overall House levies neutral compared to baseline. The House makes a number of changes, primarily through the repeal of the voluntary pre-kindergarten program, which have effects on levy, and those levy effects essentially are washed out by the change in the operating capital levy, so that there's no net levy change for the House position after the voluntary pre-kindergarten program is repealed. Section 11 is the targeted compensatory revenue program that I mentioned. Essentially what's happening is that the portion of revenue above the baseline formula allowance of $6,067, the delinked portion of compensatory, is targeted for extended time and programs, and the funding is distributed on a non-concentrated basis. Roughly the same amounts of funding you can see in subdivision 3 there, about $11 million in fiscal year 18 and $12.3 million in fiscal year 19 and thereafter, are set aside for the targeted compensatory revenue. That's again for extended time and distributed on a non-concentration basis.
Madam Chair, beginning on page R14 is a Senate-only provision, and the stricken language is marked at line 15.1 on the Senate side, and this comes from a Senator Pratt bill. And the language would allow a school board to deliver the required referendum notice by any class of mail, rather than only by first-class mail.
Madam Chair, members, on page R16 of the side-by-side summary, House Section 12 has to do with rulemaking authority for the Department of Education. Essentially, administrative law judge decision earlier this year suggested that the timelines that the Department of Education was using when asking school districts and charter schools to respond to audit requests were the equivalent of adopting a rule. The department language from their policy bill asked that the agency be given authority to establish those timelines without going through the rulemaking process. And that language you can see is the new language starting on lines 11.18, 11.19, that would allow the department to continue with its current audit procedures for school districts, especially regarding the timelines. Section 13 is a change that's contained in, it's the same in both the House and Senate, and the changes in this bill as well as the tax bill. As members may know, payments from the state to school districts are provided in general on the 90% paid in the current year and 10% paid in the following year in what we call the cleanup payment. In addition, those payments are made in twice monthly electronic transfers for the operating funds. For the non-operating funds, the biggest of which in terms of state aid is the debt service fund, the payments have a separate schedule, and you can see here the existing language says that the department needs to pay those once a month instead of twice a month throughout the year for the 90% payment. Both the House and the Senate in this bill and in the tax bill have picked up the department's request that those changes be accelerated and be made in 6 monthly payments from July through December. And essentially the effect of this then is to speed up the cash flow for school districts for their debt service needs, and that better fits with their timelines, as most school districts will make their debt service payments to the bondholders in February and August. Section 14 of the House bill is a provision that Representative Erdahl brought to the committee. This provision establishes a legislative study group on school finance, lists some of the criteria that the study group must consider, and requires the study group to issue a written report back to the legislature by February 1st, 2018. Section 15 at the bottom of page R17 for both the House and the Senate are the same. This is for the Nevis School District. Nevis is a small school district up by Park Rapids that has a lot of open enrollment students. And because of the way that the referendum revenue was recalculated in fiscal year 2015, the Nevis School District was faced with an adjustment in its levy, and this provision allows the Nevis School District to spread that adjustment out over the next 3 or fewer years.
Madam Chair, the next provision is a Senate-only provision and is a combination of ideas from Senator Nelson and Senator Housley, and it would require the Commissioner of Education to prepare a transportation report for the legislature. Provides certain elements of the report, including analyzing inequities between districts, making recommendations for statutory changes, and considering other student demographic and attendance patterns, among other criteria.
Madam Chair, members, on the bottom of page R18 on the House side, on the right side of the page, there's additional funding for pupil transportation needs for fiscal years 18 and 19. Essentially, the way the formula works is 52% of the district's unfunded costs for its regular to and from school transportation are funded through this formula. It's about $5+ million a year for each of those 2 years. Madam Chair, as we start looking at details, we can look at the distribution of that funding, but this is essentially a 2-year adjustment for districts that have large deficits when computing the pupil transportation revenue against their expenditures. Madam Chair, members, for the appropriations, I think it's been the practice in the past that we'll just deal with these on the fiscal tracking sheet unless there's some sort of rider that really calls attention to mentioning. So, and there's not one in Article 1, so if you don't mind, we'll skip the appropriations section for the fiscal review.
Yes, that sounds like a good process, Mr. Strom. Thank you.
Okay, and Madam Chair, members, on page R21 is the last section in both bills, is the repealer of a unused definition, essentially, of American Indian children, a long-time statutory provision that hasn't been used recently in terms of how those children are defined, what characteristics they have, recommended by the governor's bill and picked up in both the House and Senate is that repeal. And Madam Chair, that's the end of Article 1.
All right, thank you. Any questions from members, if you didn't ask them while we were in process? No? Okay. Oh, Representative Murphy.
Madam Chair, on the e-learning day, does that refer to all schools, that all schools can, and school districts can use that e-learning day?
Yes, I believe it's optional for all school districts, but I'll ask Mr. Strom to just confirm.
Madam Chair, that's correct. And I think at one time, the House author of that provision, Representative Drazkowski, had it limited to non-metro districts. But the provision that's in the bill would apply to all school districts in the state.
And
Representative Murphy.
Madam Chair, if a school district decides to use that and the school districts are on a waiver, was there any discussion about a cap on the number of E-days they could have?
Mr. Strom.
Both House and Senate bill limit it to 5 e-learning days that can happen during the year.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and turn to Article 2.
Madam Chair and members, I will start with the first section of Article 2, that's a House-only section provision, and that adds economics and citizenship to instruction, economics and citizenship to the subject areas for compulsory instruction. The next section, there's some differences between the House and the Senate, so we'll just speak to the House version. And it modifies physical education standards and also allows a school district to include child sexual abuse prevention instruction in a health curriculum.
Madam Chair, members, on the Senate side, the language identifies the appropriate physical education standards as the Shape America standards, as well as requiring the sample assessments developed by the department to be available in the same school year that the standards are implemented by all schools. Madam Chairman, or Chairperson, and members, the Section 2 is the same in both the House and Senate files, and it strikes obsolete rulemaking language related to the academic standards. Section 3 of the Senate file and Section 6 of the House file relate to the state bilingual and multilingual seals. The language is essentially the same. The differences are grammar differences, but it allows students in all either public, charter, or non-public schools to be able to earn a state bilingual or multilingual seal. Then moving on to the bottom of R4 and onto R5 is the Senate section, Senate-only section regarding the reading proficiency no later than the end of 3rd grade. It makes some updates and clarifies that the students receiving the literacy interventions are included in about those interventions as providing definitions. If you look on page R5, clarifying what the different assessments are and as far as what the interventions might be. Then on R6, there's language in both the House and the Senate file regarding the reports that are required of districts after students have been identified as not reading at grade level.
Madam Chair, members, the House version of our Section 7 on page R6 requires a school district to identify students in grade 3 or higher who have difficulty reading and report on efforts to identify students with dyslexia using screening tools identified by the Department of Education.
Madam Chairman and Chairperson and members, moving on then within that same section, in the Senate side, there's information about what notification and involvement parents receive on page R7. Then on further down on that page is subdivision 3 of the interventions, which talks about the multi-tiered system of supports, which is defined earlier, and also addressing the needs specific to English learners. Further on in page R8 is a requirement that a student who is unable to demonstrate grade level proficiency that does not have an IEP needs to have a personal learning plan that is developed and with the students and the teachers at the school, classroom teachers. And then also a statement that the interventions that a student receives must continue after grade 3 until the student is reading at grade level. Then moving on to R9, Section 5 of the Senate file and Section 8 of the House file are quite similar, that both bodies require the department to employ a dyslexia specialist. The Senate side has some work that the specialist would do, which would include recommendations for the increased availability of online and asynchronous professional development programs and materials. The next section is a Senate-only section on R10, Section 6, and it's a statement that school districts or schools need to inform students and their families if their achievement level on the MCAs, of their achievement level in the MCAs administered during high school, as well as then on page, was it R12, requires a district to inform students that they are eligible for free public school education until they're age 21. Then another Senate-only provision is Section 7, again on R12 and going on. The section is a increase in grant programs for STEM or APIB STEM offerings to low-income and disadvantaged students. Then moving on, at the end of that, on page R15 is a statement about the grants or a 3-year grant program.
Madam Chair and members, the next several sections are House-only sections. These are from Representative Bennett's Aaron's Law bill. Section 9 on page R15 encourages districts to train district staff and school board members on responding to disclosures of child sexual abuse and complying with mandatory reporting requirements. Section 10 allows school districts and charter schools to accept funds from other sources for child sexual abuse prevention programs. Section 11 is character development education. This adds language on lines 11 and 12 and also 17 and 18. The first piece adds language providing that that character development education is a shared responsibility of parents, teachers, and community members. And then the next addition of language on lines 17 and 18 encourages districts to integrate character development instruction into positive behavioral intervention strategies. Section 12, starting at the bottom of R16, is child sexual abuse prevention education. Subdivision 1 states that the purpose of the section is Aaron's Law, which is Aaron's Law, is to encourage districts to offer child sexual abuse prevention instruction. Subdivision 2 allows school districts to consult with other agencies and community organizations to identify tools and curricula. Subdivision 3 identifies other state programs relating to child sexual abuse prevention. And Subdivision 4 requires the Commissioner of Education to submit a report on sexual abuse prevention programs. Section 13 modifies provisions on nationally normed entrance exams, and you'll see the change is actually on page R19 on lines 26 and 27. It strikes out that language and adds language at the bottom of page R19. And it eliminates the requirement that the district administer the ACT or ACT at the high school during the day. And you will see another change on page R22, and this part is not in the Senate version, but it strikes out the words "and will." It modifies the definition of cultural competence to add families and educators, so that culturally competent means the ability of families and educators to interact effectively with people of different cultures native languages and socioeconomic backgrounds.
Madam Chair and members, on R22, Section 9 of the Senate file, there's not a comparable provision in the House file. It strikes a requirement for off-grade testing in grades 3 through 8 in the reading and math MCAs. Then moving on to R24, excuse me, Section 10 in the Senate file and Section 14 in the House file are quite similar. It requires the commissioner to have rollout sites to look at and report on recommendations for best practices in data disaggregation. The Senate side has some language on R25 that requires the commissioner to consult with stakeholders and look at how to measure a student's background as an immigrant or a refugee and provide recommendations on how to include that data in the statewide rollout of the disaggregated student data. Then the next section is on R26, Section 11 of the Senate file, which matches up with Section 15 of the House file, and it changes the categories for disaggregated student performance data. In fact, the two sections are the same, except the House file breaks out and numbers the clauses for each type of student data to disaggregate, but the otherwise exactly the same. Then on R27, Section 12 of the Senate file and Section 16 of the House file are again quite the same, and it's again the data categories to be collected. However, the Senate file looks at certain groups and determined by a Minnesota population that's based on the most recent state demographers report.
Madam Chair, members, the difference there is the House version is based on the American Community Survey, which is the census. And the next section is the House-only section. It's on page R30. This section requires, it's Section 17, it requires school districts to include in school performance reports information and proficiency rates required by ESSA, the federal law. And it requires the commissioner to post reports consistent with that paragraph A and also with the world's best workforce requirements. The next section is a House-only section as well. On page R31, it requires teacher and administrator preparation programs to report certain data for the teachers and principals that go, for the candidates that go through these programs. It's data disaggregated by race. And on page R33, you can see the categories of data that must be disaggregated there. The next section on page R33 is also a House-only provision. It amends a 122A40 by eliminating the, it requires school districts and the exclusive representatives of teachers to negotiate a plan for unrequested leave of absence. And it eliminates language saying that if there is no such language in the agreement, then it would be based on seniority. So it removes the seniority provisions. And the next section, that's section 7 on page R34, it amends 122A41. So this is for the cities of the first class. It's essentially the same change. It requires the school districts and the exclusive bargaining representatives to negotiate a plan for unrequested leave of absence. And that's effective, both those sections are effective July 1st, 2018.
Madam Chair and members, then Section 13 of the Senate file on R34 with most of the changes are start on R35. This is an amendment to the alternative teacher pay system, or the QComp agreement. It allows for hiring bonuses to provide students to equitable access to teachers who've demonstrated skills for being highly effective at closing achievement gaps, also are also working in high need positions. In addition to allowing for payment of or incentive for additional credits for being able to teach in concurrent enrollment courses, that changes on R36. And then there's also funding for Grow Your Own new teacher initiatives. It's on 46.28 to 46.30. Then Section 14 of the Senate file and Section 8 of the House file really go with Section 15 of the Senate file and Section 9 of the House file. It allows the St. Croix River Education District to be eligible to receive alternative teacher compensation revenue. The differences in 15 and Section 9 are grammar differences. There's a phrase repeated in the House file language that's not repeated in the Senate language. Then moving on to Section 16 of the Senate file and Section 10 of the House file on R37. It's providing a definition for positive behavioral intervention and supports. The House file does have some additional language that the Senate file doesn't have.
Madam Chair and members, the additional House language allows districts to use character education curriculum and programs to support the implementation of the key components of PBIS that are listed in the new language.
Madam Chair, members, then Section 17 of the Senate file on page R38 adds to the teacher mentorship program to allow programs to support teacher evaluation in the peer review process. In addition, it allows for funds to pay stipend of mentor in those programs.
Madam Chair, members, the next section is a House-only section, and it modifies open enrollment lotteries by giving priority to a new group of students. Certain students already receive priority, and so this language adds a new group. For students who do not reside in the school district, they would receive priority if they live in a municipality where the non-resident district operates a building. The resident district does not operate a building, and no other non-resident district operates a building. So that would be effective for lotteries conducted beginning July 1st, 2017. The next section is on page R39, and it's a definition of concurrent enrollment. It's similar to the Senate version.
Madam Chair, members, the Senate side just has an incorrect cross-reference. The House file has the correct, that it's to subdivision 5B on, you see, on your side 35.27, where the Senate file has 49.16 to reference to subdivision 6, which is incorrect. Then moving on, then Section 19 of the Senate file and Section 20 of the House file are the same. It's separating out the current provisions for post-secondary enrollment options for 11th and 12th graders and concurrent enrollment for 9th and 10th graders. So that section is the one striking some language. And then the next section, Section 20 of the Senate file and Section 21 of the House file and R40 are the same, and that's the provisions for the 9th and 10th grade pupils. And that's the subdivisions that's being referred to in the Section 18 and Section 19, where the Senate picked up subdivision 6 when it should be 5B. This is the 5B that the reference is to.
Madam Chair and members, the next section, Section 22 of the House file on page R40, This relates to the PSEO programs, and it eliminates limits on post-secondary institutions' ability to advertise or recruit high school students.
Madam Chair, members, on R41, Section 21 of the Senate file adds to the concurrent enrollment provision to encourage districts to offer introduction to teaching or introduction to education courses. And then I think later there's funding for those.
Madam Chair and members, the next section, Section 23 of the House file on page R41, it requires a school to allow a student enrolled in a PSEO course to remain at the school site during the regular school day. And it requires the school to adopt a policy that provides reasonable access to computers and technology during the school day. On page R42, the next section there, that section requires the school board to adopt a policy regarding weighted grade point averages for students in dual enrollment courses. The next section, Section 25 of the House file and Section 22 of the Senate, those are the same, and it increases the number of days that the department has to pay post-secondary institutions for concurrent enrollment students from 30 to 45. The next section, Section 26, starting at the bottom of page R43. That prohibits discrimination by online learning programs, and the change, you'll see it, it's on page R45, on lines 13 and 14. The next section, Section 27, that's a House-only provision, and that's Representative Erickson's bill. It codifies innovative pilot project provisions that were enacted in 2012 and 2014 session laws. And it notes that districts that were previously approved for the pilot projects may continue to operate. The next section on page R47, Section 28 of the House bill and Section 23 of the Senate bill, those are largely this. I'll let the Senate speak to that, but those they extend for 1 year on the House side a fiscal year 2017 provision that allows districts to receive funding for certain early middle college program participants that remain enrolled until the student turns 22.
The Senate side does the same thing, just words it a little differently. Then Section 24 of the Senate file allows in approved recovery programs, adds to the possibility for grants the approved pupil transportation expenses for those recovery program grants. Then at the very bottom of R48 is Section 25, or start of Section 25 of the Senate file, and that provides a cap on the literacy incentive aid for at the fiscal year 2017 amount. Section 26 of the Senate file on R49 is the Senate's Innovation Zone proposal, and it allows for districts and to join other partners to form an innovative zone partnership and provide research and innovative education programs and models to their students. And it provides various exemptions from laws and rules, as well as forms a innovation zone advisory panel, which helps review the program and makes recommendations to the commissioner, who approves different partnerships for their innovation zone plans. And that gets us to R54. And this is the beginning of some of the charter school provisions. It's Section 27 of the Senate side and Section 29 of the House side, and they are essentially the same. We just did a little differently as far as the references for a student at a charter school and their classroom placement with a teacher that has been determined to be ineffective in the subsequent year placement. The Senate side just as a reference to the paragraph in 122A 40 subdivision 8. Then the next section is section 28 of the Senate file on R55. That section is spelling out the roles and responsibilities and requirements of charter school authorizers. Then, where does that start? Then, more so, it's a section 30, which starts in R56, but it goes over the languages on R57, and that is about the notice to families when an authorizer chooses to withdraw from the sponsorship of the chartered school. Section 31 is language regarding what happens when a charter school, two charter schools want to merge. Then, moving on, section 32 of the Senate file, and which there's no comparable provision on the House side, is the membership of the Charter School Board of Directors. It strikes the reference to the Chief Financial Officer being an ex officio non-voting member, and then clarifies that the teachers that are part of the board are teachers employed by the school to provide instruction to those students. Then section 33 of the Senate file, which starts on R58, but the changes really are on R59, which the changes are not changes. They're just adding clauses to the existing language and breaking out that there's actually 3 versus 2 pieces of criteria or portions of criteria. Then section 34 of the Senate file on R59 clarifies the training that's needed for that it's for non-voting and voting members, and that the timeline for the training to be completed after a board member has begun their service. Section 35 is about how charter schools basically reform or change. That there can be a mutual agreement to not to renew a contract, so how they transfer the authorizers under that proposal. Then paragraph B is if it's at the end of the contract period. Then paragraph C is if the authorizer withdraws, and then paragraph D is if the commissioner withdraws the authority of the authorizer to authorize charter schools. Section 36 of the Senate file and section 30 of the House file are similar about the mission requirements and enrollment for charter schools, and the similar requirements are required for the charter school if they offer a pre-kindergarten program. And then at the end of that section, the Senate file on R61 has some language about the ability of the charter school to, about distributing any services of value to students, that it clarifies that it's the charter school or any agent of the school. And then on R62, it clarifies in paragraph G language about when a student is no longer enrolled in the charter school, and it clarifies that it needs to be, they get either a request for transfer of the records from another school, or there's a written election by the parent or guardian of the student withdrawing the student from that school. Section 37 of the Senate file clarifies that the charter school needs to document their efforts to disseminate information about about the charter school offerings or how they are used. Then on Section 38 is building lease aid for charter schools, and that they can include the students that are participating in PSEO in their pupil counts for the charter school building lease aid. Section 39 of the Senate file and Section 31 of the House file are the same. It is actually a reference back to some of the definitions that were provided in the section about reading proficiency no later than 3rd grade.
Madam Chair and members, the next section on page R64, that's from the House file, that adds, as it relates to alternative teacher preparation programs. The first subdivision creates some new definitions. It defines alternative teacher preparation program. It defines a program, and it defines shortage area, as well as the word unit, which is an institution or subdivision of an institution that oversees the teacher preparation program. Subdivision 2 establishes a grant program for alternative teacher preparation programs that fill teacher shortage area. Subdivision 3 specifies how the grants can be used, and Subdivision 4 requires grant recipients to report on their ability to fill shortage areas. The next section on page R66 adds economic development regions where there is a shortage of teachers of color to the definition of teacher shortage area. That definition pertains to the teacher shortage loan forgiveness program. The next section also pertains to the teacher shortage loan forgiveness program, and it expands teacher shortage loan forgiveness program eligibility to include teachers of color. The next section on page R67, it also relates to teacher shortage loan forgiveness, and it expands the reporting requirement to include information on the race or ethnicity of the teachers that are participating in the program. The next section on page R67, it expands the Northwest Regional Partnership Program that was established to help teachers get the number of credits they would need to teach courses for post-secondary credit in the high schools. It expands that program to be a statewide program, which would allow teachers throughout Minnesota to access it. And it would require this new state partnership to submit an annual joint report to the legislature and Office of Higher Ed on the progress of its activities. The next section on page R69, that's section 33 on the House side, it extends the time that the Education Innovation Partners Cooperative Center can spend up to $310,000 of its remaining state grant during fiscal year 2018 and fiscal year 2019.
The Senate side makes the original appropriation of $500,000 in the fiscal 2017 available until June 30th, 2019.
The next section, section 16 on page R70, it authorizes the Office of Higher Education to spend up to 2% of its past appropriation, the $2.8 million that was previously appropriated. Up to 2% of that can now be spent on administrative costs. And then next section, section 17 on the House side and section 41 of the Senate, those are the same. And those establish a grant program to pay agricultural educators for summer work with high school students in extended programs. Section, on page R71, section 35 on the House side, section 42 on the Senate side, requires the Commissioner of Education to submit its ESSA plan to the legislature, and the first paragraph of those are the same on the House and Senate side. The House side adds language with certain requirements that the state plan must meet. It has to be aligned with the world's best workforce accountability measures, and it must establish indicators of school quality or student success and list specific indicators there.
Madam Chair and members, on R72, Section 43 of the Senate file is the educational stability for students in foster care, and that establishes a pilot project to encourage school districts and counties to form partnerships to allow a student in foster care to remain in their school of origin. Then section 44 of the Senate file on page R73 is language encouraging school districts to use some of their federal funds for STEM programs. Section 45 the Senate file are rural, career, and technical education consortium grants, and it establishes those grants and reporting requirements, and allows each of them to receive private funds as well as the appropriation in the bill.
Madam Chair, members, section 36 on the House side, just the very head note is on R74, and then the rest of it is on R75. That establishes a competitive grant program to support after-school programs. And then the next section, section 38, appropriates $2,450,000 each in fiscal year 18 and 19 for grants to intermediate school districts for school-based mental health grants. Then the next section is the appropriations section.
Madam Chair, members, on page R93 of Article 2 is a repealer on the Senate side, and it's a repeal of a charter school provision about mutual non-renewal. And Madam Chair, that's the end of Article 2.
All right. Any questions on Article 2? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to Article 3.
Madam Chair, members, Article 3 on the Senate side, I believe, is all the teacher.
Oh, that's right.
Licensure.
The licensure. All right, so we're not going to do that today. So we'll move on to Article 4.
Madam Chair, members, Article 4 in your binders is where we'll start for the special education article. The first provision on page R1 of Article 4 has to do with the individualized education program, and essentially what's being added is a requirement that school boards provide cultural competency training to professionals that work with students with disabilities and to certain special education teachers who are serving on the IEP committee. Section 2, starting on page R3, has to do with the data review and requires school districts and school sites to review data on the number of students referred for emotional behavior disorder evaluation, EBD evaluation, and requires that to be disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and gender. The provision also encourages school districts to consult with teachers and other staff on strategies to reduce disproportionate representation of students by race, gender, or ethnicity in evaluation referrals. The next the next section, Section 3 of the House and Section 1 of the Senate are the same. And then Section 4 of the House, beginning on page R4, and section 2 of the Senate are similar, I think, or are they the same? I was thinking there was one thing that was different. I guess those are similar. And this provision has to do with the the St. Francis School District, where there's a care and treatment facility referred to as bar none. And this is a similar issue to the one for the Wilmer facilities. Essentially, what this provision is doing is allowing that facility to be counted for purposes of certain tuition billbacks to the resident districts. When a student is placed there from a different district, it allows certain additional costs to be billed back to the resident district. And the reference on the bottom of page R5 to the law in 1992 was when the state made an appropriation of authority to the district to construct the facility to provide the educational services. And this has to do with the educational services essentially being provided off-site from the bar none facility. Section 5 is the third-party reimbursement. There's several provisions related to this. Essentially, these provisions related to third-party reimbursement make clear that a school district can seek reimbursement for those evaluations that are required, even if the result of the evaluation is not the formal establishment of a IEP or an individualized family service plan for the student. Section 4 of the Senate and 6 of the House, which appear on page R8, are the same. And these provisions have to do with the name changes. One of the issues in the K-12 area has been how to describe residential facilities, which are often referred to as care and treatment facilities. And the idea that's presented on the House and Senate side here is from the governor's bill, which is to change the name in the education code to children's residential facility, so that the care and treatment more is used as the human services end of things for the physical facility itself. And so the goal here is simply a terminology improvement. Starting on page R11, section 5 of the Senate is the same as section 7 of the House, and again, this is clarifying and allowing the third-party reimbursement for certain required evaluations.
Madam Chair, at the bottom of R11, Senate side, section 6 relates to the calculation of special education aids, and the new language you'll see on the middle of page R12. One input to the special education aid formulas is the amount of aid a district or a charter school generated for fiscal year 2016. And what this language would allow is when a district for example, changes its serving patterns, so they might have previously served students within the district, and now they're using a special ed co-op or intermediate district. This would allow the department to make certain adjustments to reflect those different costs for the purposes of calculating special ed aid going forward. And this results in a small savings relative to the special ed base. At the bottom of page R12, section 7 is the same in the House and Senate, and relates to the section that Mr. Strom described earlier about medical assistance coverage for certain special education evaluations. On page R14, section 8 is the same as, well, with the exception of the effective date, it's the same as the language in the House side, and it would cancel and reappropriate a portion of the money that had been previously appropriated for the Southwest Minnesota State University Special Education Teacher Education programs. And I think even with the different effective date, the practical effect is the same. On the bottom of page R15, there's provision in both bodies for a special education assistive technology study. It would require the Commissioner of Education to examine the use of assistive technology in Minnesota schools, make certain requirements about data reporting, require the Commissioner to determine whether to prepare a revised manual, require a certain report, and I believe that the differences in the language are mostly technical and having to do with whether the report should be delivered to the committee or to the chair and ranking member on the committee. And I think in general, the House language is preferred. You know, deliver a report to a person rather than to a committee. And then we're to the appropriations section. On page R17, the Senate Section 11 provides a repealer for 2 subdivisions within the Special Education Aid Code that are no longer needed. They were needed in previous fiscal years, but not any longer. And that concludes this article.
Not seeing any questions on Article 4. We'll move on to Article 5.
Madam Chair and members, Article 5, Facilities and Technology. Most sections here relate to the Purpose Center with some small exceptions. Section 1 strikes the Purpose Center from a section relating to unclassified positions. Section 2 on page R2 going on to R3 is the same. It strikes the Purpose Center from section on state unclassified positions. Section 3 at the bottom of page R3 relates to lead in school drinking water. And subdivision 1 requires the Commissioners of Health and Education to develop a model plan to require school districts to test for lead in school drinking water. Subdivision 2 requires the school districts and charter schools to adopt plans for testing. Subdivision 3 relates to the frequency of the testing. Subdivision 4 allows school districts to include testing and remediation in their long-term facilities maintenance plans. And subdivision 5 requires school districts and charter schools to post the test results on their websites. Section 4, alternative teacher compensation revenue. This strikes the Purpose Center from this statute. And Section 5, severance pay, again, it also just strikes the Purpose Center from the statute. Section 6, on page R6, it cancels a dissolving school district's operating referendum authority. It does not cancel the referendum authority of the neighboring school districts when there's voluntary or involuntary dissolution. And this will be retroactive to January 1st, 2017. Section 9 on page R6, and I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that it's the same language on the Senate side for that. Section 9 of the Senate side, of the House side, I'm sorry. Long-term facilities maintenance revenue, it makes 2 changes. The first is it strikes the voluntary pre-K program from the statute that relates to long-term facilities maintenance revenue. And it also provides that a district that qualified for this revenue in 2010 will remain eligible in 2017 and later. Section 7 on page R7 requires a school district or intermediate school to include remediation of lead hazards in a facilities plan, and it would be effective for fiscal years 2018 and later.
Madam Chair, on page R8, there are 2 Senate-only provisions. The first would have to do with the review of proposals for projects subject to review and comment from the commissioner. And it would require the commissioner to include comments from citizens from the school district in the commissioner's review of that proposal. The next section, section 3, would require that a school board hold a public hearing to discuss the details of the commissioner's review and comment on a particular project before the bond election to finance that project is held.
The next section, section 8 on page R8, it strikes the Purpose Center from the statute relating to an agreement on students attending schools in another state.
Madam Chair, on the bottom of page R9, Senate Section 4 relates to the state guarantee for certain debt obligations, and it would require that to be eligible for the state payment or the state guarantee under this section, a debt obligation for a project that required review and comment from the commissioner must only be spent on purposes consistent with the information required and provided in that review and comment.
House Section 9 on page R10 establishes the Lola and Rudy Perpich Arts Division in the Department of Education to provide art support services throughout Minnesota. Subdivision 2 lists the division's specific responsibilities, including conducting research, developing curriculum, disseminating information, providing materials to school districts, collaborating with the Commissioner of Education to develop art standards and policies, serving as liaison for the Department of Education to national organizations, and it allows the Commissioner to apply for funds from public and private sources. Section 10, mostly on page R11, this strikes the Purpose Center from the statute relating to sales to government agencies.
Madam Chair, on the bottom of page R12, it's another Senate-only provision, and it would amend Chapter 475 to clarify that, to require that the proceeds of obligations or debt issued by a school district for a project requiring review and comment from the commissioner must only be spent on purposes consistent with the information required under that review and comment process. On page R13, section 6 on the Senate side, this provision would, for fiscal year 2017, provide an additional $150,000 in grant monies to Kelleher School District. The other school districts listed there were all anticipated, in fact, did repay the maximum effort loan under the authority granted in the 2016 bill. In fact, Kelleher also did, but they were not originally included in this language. And the Senate proposes to sort of retroactively include Kelleher here for fiscal year 17. And I think we'll see later in the article that the Senate proposes to include Kelleher for the next several years in this aid incentive as well. On the bottom of page R13, Senate Section 7 and House Section 11 both deal with the disposition or the conveyance of the Crosswind School and the proceeds of that sale. The Senate language would authorize the Commissioner of Administration to convey or sell the Crosswind School property to a buyer on the open market, and require that the Commissioner offer the property for sale for no less than fair market value. And before offering the school property for sale, must determine that the property is no longer needed to carry out the governmental program. So the language in paragraph B is essentially a restatement of the laws regarding surplus state lands. On the Senate side, subdivision 2 would require that would provide some guidance for how the proceeds of the sale and the subsequent savings to the state general fund should be treated. So if the property were sold, the proceeds of of that sale would be deposited in the state bond fund. And the effect of that deposit would be to reduce the amount of the required transfer from the general fund to the bond fund on the next December 1st. And the amount of that savings under this language would be appropriated then from the general fund to TRA for fiscal year 2019.
Madam Chair and members, on page R13, the House language on the Crosswinds School, section 11, it allows the Crosswinds School to be conveyed for continued use as an East Metropolitan Area Integration School, effective July 1st, 2017. And then the next section on page R14, Crosswinds contingency funds. It states that if the Crosswinds facility has not been sold by June 30th of next year, then the appropriations, certain appropriations are canceled, and those appropriations are one-time pupil aid of $718 per pupil, and the second year of the teacher shortage loan forgiveness aid, which is $3.2 million. If the facility has been sold for less than $10 million, then there would be a reduction in teacher shortage loan forgiveness aid, and then the one-time pupil aid before July 1st, if the sale is before July 1st, 2018.
Madam Chair, on the middle of page R14, the Senate provides some transition language regarding the Crosswinds School, and this language would really only apply if, after the sale or conveyance, if another school or school district were to operate a school site on the Crosswinds site. So subdivision 1 would provide that any student enrolled in the Crosswinds School now could continue to enroll in the Crosswinds School any subsequent year if a school exists there. And subdivision 2 would clarify the calculation of compensatory literacy aid and alt-comp revenue for the district that might operate a school at that site for the 2017 and 2018 school year only. Because these three programs are calculated off of prior year pupil counts in the first year of a school site, absent this language, there would be no revenue under these programs for that school site.
Madam Chair, members, section 13 on the House side, starting at the bottom of page R14, provides for the closure of the Purpose Center. Subdivision 1 close it effective June 30th of 2018. Subdivision 2 transfers property in the Purpose Arts Library to the department. Subdivision 3 allows students at the Purpose High School that are enrolled for the 17-18 school year. Students currently enrolled could continue to enroll for the 17-18 school year, but there would be no further enrollment after that. And subdivision 4 requires the center to transfer student records according to state law. And this section would be effective immediately following enactment. Section 14 of the House side and section 9 of the Senate side is the appropriations. And then section 15 of the House side is the repealer. And that repeals, the paragraph A is Purpose Center statutes and rules. And then paragraph B repeals retroactively to January 1st, 2017, the statutory section that cancels each neighboring school district's referendum authority when a school district voluntarily dissolves.
And Madam Chair, the Senate language also has the dissolution-related repealer, and paragraph B of the Senate repealer repeals the authority for Perpich Center to operate the Crosswinds School.
All right, any questions over that article? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the next article, Article 6.
Madam Chair, Article 6 is largely the same between the Senate and House. I'll kick it off here. On the Senate side, Section 7 and House Section 1, and the next section both come from the same proposal, and it would allow a school board to contract with a food service management company for longer than 2 years after the initial contract period. So, for example, 2, 3, or 4 years, but not more than 4 additional years. That's the same between the House and Senate language.
And Madam Chair, members, on page R2, starting at the bottom of that page, sections 10 and 11 are from the House, Article 8, and these have to do with the House's elimination of the voluntary pre-kindergarten program. That program, when it was created, essentially was the students were considered enrolled students, the pre-kindergarten students, and were added to formulas like the lunch formulas. And Section 10 on page R2 and Section 11 on page R3 return the language to how it was prior to the inclusion of the voluntary pre-kindergarten students, so that the meal program, state reimbursement for the meal programs would apply for students in grades kindergarten through 12. And Madam Chair, that's it for Article 6.
All right, any questions on Article 6? All right, seeing none, Article 7.
Madam Chair, Article 7, again, is largely the same. This is the library's article. Section 1 in both bills would clarify that the department may give advice and instruction to school districts and charter schools, and the differences between the bills are strictly grammatical. And then the appropriations sections are identical.
All right, so it's Article 7. Article 8.
Madam Chair and members, Article 8 is early childhood and family support. First few sections are from Representative Loon's bill establishing an Office of Early Education and Development. Sections 1 and 2 relate to data. So the first section allows the Director of Early Education and Development access to educational data. Section 2 allows the Director access to human services data. Section 3 contains definitions that would be in the new Chapter 119C, including the Commissioner here relates to the Commissioner of Administration, and Department is Department of Administration. The Director is this new position that is created, and early education programs that would be moved to Chapter 119C are school readiness, early learning scholarships, and Head Start. Section 4 is kind of a policy provision saying that the purpose of this new chapter is to establish an office to coordinate the early education and development programs and to maximize quality, access, accountability, and cost effectiveness. Section 5 on page R2 relates to this new position of the Director of Early Education and Development. Subdivision 1 requires the governor to appoint this director, subject to advice and consent of the Senate. And the director would report to the Commissioner of Administration, who would provide administrative support. Subdivision 2 establishes the qualifications of the director. Subdivision 3, the compensation of the director. Subdivision 4 is the duties and powers. The director would develop early education program policies, coordinate outreach to families, streamline the programs, manage data collection, et cetera, and some of these we'll touch on as I go through the rest of the section. The director would have the authority to direct the Commissioner of Education to administer early education programs according to the director's plans, and direct the Commissioner of Human Services to administer the quality rating and improvement system according to the director's plans. Subdivision 5, coordination with other agencies, requires the Commissioner of Human Services and Commissioner of Education to provide the director data on early education and CCAP program participants. The director would coordinate the activities of these early education programs, including the QRIS, the Parent Aware system, and would coordinate with the Commissioner of Education and Human Services to develop a form so that parents would consent to sharing the private data with the director. Subdivision 6 allows the director access to educational data and the human services data. It limits the data that the director can access to the enumerated programs on page R4. And paragraph D in subdivision 6 requires if there's a certain number of employees in the department that in the office that would require access to the private data, the director would have to establish written procedures to ensure that only authorized persons could access the data, and it would require a data trail as well. Subdivision 7 requires an annual report.
All right, Ms. Parra, if you'd suspend, Senator Uyghur has a question.
I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you. Madam Chair, I noticed there's not any similar language on the Senate side, but there may be in the Senate provisions in the Health and Human Service Omnibus bill. I had worked with Senator Rolfe and others on some data sharing provisions. I'm quite sure, you might want to look at that between now and the next couple of meetings as to some potential similar provisions.
Thank you, Senator Uyghur. We will look at that. Thank you. Ms. Parra.
Madam Chair and members, Subdivision 7 on page R4 requires the director to report annually to the legislature. It must include certain data, including number of children participating in the programs, the aid per family, et cetera. Section 6 is program administration, starting at the bottom of page R4. It directs the director can direct the Commissioner of Education and Human Services to apply for certain funds. Subdivision 2 allows the director to charge a fee on a sliding scale program for programs under Chapter 119C. Subdivision 3 requires children enrolled in one of these early education programs to receive a kindergarten readiness assessment. And Subdivision 4 guarantees the same level of aid for early education programs in fiscal year 2018 and later that they receive in 2017. Section 7 on page R5, aid limits. Subdivision 1 allows the director to establish limits that a limit to the aid that a child may generate from these early education programs. The director would establish the limits by January 15th, 2019, and implement the limit by July 1st, 2019. Subdivision 2, if a child is generating aid in excess of the limit that the director sets, the director must reduce that aid. And Subdivision 3 provides that the programs included in the limit include federal Head Start aids. Subdivision 4 allows the director to waive the limits for children facing extreme hardship or urgent need. Section 8 on page R6 allows the director to establish early education resource hubs throughout the state that would develop strategies to support outreach to families. Section 9 Section 9 is long-term facilities maintenance revenue. That, again, I believe that appeared in a different article, but that strikes the voluntary pre-K program from the statute relating to long-term facilities maintenance revenue and allows the district that received this revenue in 2010 to continue to receive it in 2017 and later. Section 10 on page R7 strikes the voluntary pre-K program from the statute on breakfast reimbursement. Section 11, again, that strikes the voluntary pre-kindergarten program from the statute on breakfast and lunch fees. Section 12 on page R8, that delinks the formula allowance for the early childhood family education programs from the basic formula allowance. It increases the ECFE formula to $140.77 for fiscal year 2018 and $141.20 for fiscal year 2019 and later. Section 13 allows a charter school or a group of charter schools to establish a school readiness program. Section 14 on page R8 allows a charter school to receive aid for a school readiness program in the same manner as school districts. And it increases the total regular school readiness aid entitlement in fiscal year 2018 by $4 million and by $5 million by fiscal year 2019 and later. Section 15 on page R9, it modifies the language relating to early learning scholarships. It changes the purpose from increasing access to closing opportunity gaps by increasing access. And it strikes language relating to ages. That's addressed later in later sections.
Madam Chair, the difference in the House, the Senate language here is that the Senate language does not strike the age range from the purpose statement, but in the purpose statement clarifies that the Senate's proposal is to increase the age range beginning at birth through age 5. Madam Chair, I think in general, the effect of the Senate language in section 2 and 3 following is to expand the eligibility for the early learning scholarships to children from age birth to age 5, and to, on the bottom of page R10, provide some guidance to the commissioner regarding how the commissioner must give highest priority to children coming from families in certain situations or with certain unique needs.
Madam Chair, the House language, section 16 on page R9, it's rather than stating the age for the eligible child, it defines eligible child by setting up different ways that a child can meet that criteria. And so that language starts at the bottom of R9. An eligible child could be between the ages of 3 and 5, or a sibling from birth to age 5 that has a sibling of a child that has a scholarship, or the child of a parent under age 21 pursuing a high school degree or course of study, or a child who is homeless in foster care or in need of child protective services. So those all just go under the definition of eligible child. And then section 17 on page R10, the administration of the early learning scholarships, it prohibits the commissioner from designating a scholarship for use in a predetermined program. And it also requires the commissioner to give highest priority to certain children. And that language is similar to the language on the Senate side. The House language on page R11 also on paragraph C, it strikes language relating to the 4-star rated program. That also it's relating to limiting how the scholarships can be used so that the commissioner would not be able to designate scholarships for use in predetermined programs. Section 18 on the House side, early childhood program eligibility. The change on line 115.29, that postpones by 6 years the date by which a program must have a 3 or 4-star rating to accept an early learning scholarship. Section 19, it strikes the voluntary pre-kindergarten program from the statute relating to English learners. Section 21 strikes the voluntary pre-kindergarten program from the statute on pupil units.
Madam Chair, on page R14, the Senate proposes to require the Legislative Coordinating Commission, or LCC, to provide for a study of early childhood care and education programs. Would require the LCC to issue a request for proposal, select a consultant, engage the Commissioners of Education, Human Services, and Health in that study, and require a report from the LCC to the chairs and ranking minority members of the legislature, legislative committees of Education, Health, and Human Services, and provides certain requirements of recommendations in the report.
Madam Chair, members, the report on the House side is similar, but it's a report by the Commissioner of Human Services and the Commissioner of Education, and it covers many of the same topics that the Senate report does. Section 23 on the House side on page R16, that's school readiness aid, and that section increases each district's school readiness aid in fiscal year 2018 by an amount equal to its total voluntary pre-kindergarten revenue. It increases each district's school readiness aid for fiscal year 2019 by 90% of the 2017 voluntary pre-K revenue. And then that aid is eliminated after fiscal year 2019. Section 24 is the appropriations.
Madam Chair, if I can interject here, on page R17, there is a Senate-only provision here in the appropriations section that I think it might be good for the committee to see and understand. Senate Subdivision 3, paragraph B, would authorize a portion of the early learning scholarship appropriation to be transferred to the Commission of Human Services for the purposes of financing the quality rating and improvement system. It would require that the amount transferred must be reduced by the amount of any federal funding for the same purpose. But this is one way in which the Senate proposes to finance the QRIS in DHS.
Right. And the rest is all appropriations? Is that correct?
Yes, but after the appropriations, there's a reviser's instruction to recodify those early education programs in the new Chapter 119C. And also Section 27 repeals the voluntary pre-kindergarten statute.
All right, and I think, members, what I'd like to do at this time, just because I want to honor the commissioner's time to allow her to provide testimony since she rearranged her schedule to be here today. So I think we will go ahead and do that now. We do have House Ways and Means Committee coming in here at 2 o'clock. So unfortunately, we lose our room at that time. So I think we'll turn to the commissioner, have her testimony, if there's time for member questions, and then tomorrow you can resume with the side-by-side in the spreadsheets. All right, welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chairs. I appreciate you having me here today, and I appreciate your work that you've done all session. I have been meeting with you regularly throughout the session, have appeared before this committee multiple times, both in the House and in the Senate, and in Ways and Means and Finance, and have outlined quite a bit on what I think could be still negotiated within these bills. And I want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to do that today. I realize the time constraint here, and I know you've had a long couple of hours already, so I'll try to be concise, but I also do want to be thorough so that you have what you need from the governor and myself in terms of what's in these bills that we would like to still continue to discuss as we move forward in the conference committee, so thank you for that. I believe we have an opportunity with a $1.6 billion surplus to really invest in our kids and our shared future. These opportunities don't come knocking at the door often, and there is no better time than now. Our demographics are rapidly shifting. We are in a teacher supply crisis, and our workforce demands a highly skilled worker, not to mention an educated, informed citizenry, and little great Minnesotans that respect our diversity and uphold our shared democratic values. Therefore, I urge the conference committee members to fight for a better target. $300 million in the Senate and $273 million in the House is just not enough to build a world-class education system that achieves the goals that I just outlined. I think all of you know that and have expressed that you also have desire to raise the target. I feel the need to clarify, though, right at the start, that yes, we do have increases in education. $845 million has been shared by many of the members with the public. But but we can't pretend that this is new money for school districts. Doing so is like saying that the $10 I had to pay for my tank of gas last week can buy the same number of gallons this week and get me to the same location when the cost of gas went up 25 cents. You just come up short. You can't get to where you want to go, and you can't blame the car for not getting you there. So we've just got to get more money on that target. We have more kids. We have more special needs students and higher education costs for special needs. We have more money going to facilities, and these are things that were negotiated in good faith in previous legislative sessions, accounted for, and appropriated in the base. Talking about these items as new money out of context is ignoring the fact that these items put into the base are monies that school districts have already depended on and put in their budgets. We just can't be making policy and funding decisions and then changing them every year. It's not responsible stewardship of the public dollar, and it's not fair to our kids or our school districts who depend on our sound vetting of these decisions and our judgment. They have to be able to trust us when they're making their budgets every year. We passed voluntary pre-kindergarten as an example just last session. It was not passed as a pilot program, it was built into the base, and school districts depended on us to keep our word. Parents depended on us to keep our word. They remodeled or built their facilities for preschool, changed grade configurations at schools, hired new staff, bought new classroom curriculum, play sets, technology, and other materials. It's just not fair in the House bill to do away with voluntary pre-kindergarten and replace it with temporary school readiness funding for the next 2 years. That, let me be clear, is gone in the current rendition in 2 years. Without even knowing if additional resources would be available, 269 districts and charters stepped up to the plate and said that they wanted to have pre-kindergarten next year. 13,800 kids waiting for us to act. Parents want to choose their schools for their pre-K, and we should honor that. 821 kids are currently waiting for a Pathway 1 scholarship. That would take $6 million a year to fund. That's $12 million over the biennium. Why would we overfund scholarships when 13,800 kids are waiting? I support moving the scholarships to 0 to 3. This is a good move and could be prioritized for at-risk kids. The governor believes that children deserve a great start in life, and pre-K is essential, early learning is essential, childcare is essential for that to happen. Matter of fact, the governor invests $59 million in the childcare program in the DHS budget to better care for the reimbursement rates and reform the system. He also provides a $60 million childcare tax credit. His approach has always been a mixed approach to early learning investments. But we have invested heavily over the years in scholarships, Head Start, school readiness, and the facts are we have greater demand in the marketplace for BPK. 13,800 kids are waiting. It makes sense to broaden our options for parents to schools and match the support that we have in childcare, which the governor put investments in, and scholarships. As for Pathway 2, it's unfair that the House bill cuts these programs and threatens 548 parent-aware rated programs and 6,400 kids who will not have a guaranteed spot to high-quality facility, child-care facilities. Furthermore, we should allow 0 to 3, and we should not back down on quality by moving out of the required date to be parent-aware rated. I strongly support that scholarships be targeted first to children 0 to 3, our youngest, most at-risk kids, prioritizing the homeless and foster care children, which is in your bills. And we, are, by the way, already do, but it's good to have it codified in law. I do not support an early learning office. I think that creates a greater bureaucracy, and we've, over this years, been able to get the scholarships out in a way that's been good in working with our administrative partners across the state. The governor stands ready to meet the demands in early learning, expanding access to as many kids as possible, and working with the conference committee toward serving the most kids. The governor has proposed a $713 million package. Most of those proposals build on bipartisan investments over the past 6 years, which strengthen our school district bottom lines, so they can deliver on the promise of an excellent education for all our children. He started with 2% each year on the formula. That's $371 million. Even this increase falls short of the inflationary costs school districts will face this year. And the current targets of 253 in the House, or 73 in the House, and 300 million doesn't even cover this basic increase. We could help district bottom lines by covering the underfunded costs of special education. The governor has suggested a modest $43 million increase to do this, and even doing this wouldn't cost the underfunded costs of special education, which we know also affects districts' bottom lines and is very hard to make up. Pensions also affect district bottom lines. We miss an opportunity here to help districts address the rising costs of pensions, and the governor suggested we invest $68 million. I've come before this committee many times to talk about our old and dying mainframe. I can't stress enough our vulnerability here. If we don't fix this beast, we'll be regretting it in the very near future, and I can no longer guarantee timely payments to our schools. And we should also continue to make effort and address the paperwork burden by funding our online IEP system. Last session, we passed equalization funding for American Indian students. As many of you know, this is incredibly something I'm passionate about. They deserve equal resources just like any other Minnesota student, and let's not turn our back on them. The governor has been clear that we simply cannot serve our students, families, teachers, and school leaders well if we have cuts to the agency. He's proposed increases so that we do not have to cut 15 employees due to increases that this body has agreed to for employee contracts. We just must not cut the agency. He's also said that he wants clean funding bills without controversial policy. Therefore, I suggest that we would do the things that we can agree on and eliminate those that we know are controversial. I have outlined in my letter, which I provided to the committee, to you, the policies and funding provisions in your bill that we do not agree with or need further work. In the House bill, we cannot accept any changes to the compensatory program, which support our students in the highest poverty schools in the state. This includes delinking and attaching any new targeted funding to test participation. We simply cannot punish these schools because parents exercise their right to choose that their kids opt out of state tests. As Representative Mariani so precisely testified on the floor, most of the kids opting out are wealthier kids. So our poorer students who go to those schools who generate the funding would lose funding because of wealthier kids opting out. This just isn't fair. Another equity walkback is the change in both bills to the ACT. Poor students should not be expected to navigate a reimbursement for the ACT when we do not have that same requirement for our higher achieving students who take their AP and IB exams at the high school, or for tuition for PSEO. It's just not fair. I want to commend the policy chairs for their work on teacher licensure. Although I agree with most of it, I have serious concerns with Tier 1 and Tier 2 licensing happening at the school district level. I can't even imagine trying to ensure a high level of quality teacher with over 325 districts and 150 charter schools doing their own thing and being able to license teachers. Why create a professional board and turn around and have citizen boards with limited or potentially no experience or expertise in teaching licensed teachers? We must ensure the highest standards and quality for our teachers. I also do believe that a bachelor's degree is a basic requirement for a Minnesota teacher. Allowing AA degrees and credentials as a minimum outside of CT or professionals in the CTE area is unacceptable. I don't think we should be eliminating increases also to ECFE, Adult Basic Education, the Minnesota School for the Deaf and Blind, or our partnership zones like NAS and SPPN and redistributing that money. I do support expanding transformation zones and partnerships. I think that's a great idea, but let's not shift money to be able to do that. A bigger target would help with that. The governor has appointed new leadership at Perpich and believes there is still a need for statewide performing arts school. He does not support closing the school, and as for Crosswinds, we should not veer from the precedent and charge for the conveyance of that school. We have 2 districts who have expressed interest in that building. We should not use money that is set aside for students on a building that the state has already paid for with state funds. That just doesn't make sense to charge the taxpayers, property taxpayers, or take money from students to pay for a building we already own and have paid for. So the governor has said he has ideas and you have ideas. You've listened to hundreds of testimony and he respects that time that you've spent. So let's bring those to the table and negotiate a good bill. There are worthy ideas in your bills, investments in the teacher workforce and grow your own programs, school counselors and support, something the governor has proposed, full service community schools, support for Reading Corps, which we've supported in the past, mental health supports for our intermediate schools, just to name a few. Those are good things that we should negotiate and talk about. A bigger target will help us do a lot of it. And so let's work together. Just one last provision around the Every Student Succeeds Act that I want to mention. We had a great meeting last night talking about some of our preliminary decisions for the Every Student Succeeds Act. If we have the provision in there for that to be approved by this body when they're not in session, we will risk not being able to get $230 million out to our neediest schools who depend on that money and are making decisions around that right now in their budgets. So I ask you to make that change. I'm happy to collaborate with this committee, hold hearings that you request, and have done that in the past. But let's not have an approval process that would restrict us from having $230 million to our schools. Thank you for letting me give the testimony today, and I'd be willing to take any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate you being here, and again, appreciate you adjusting your schedule. Clearly, we have some differences with the House bill, some with the Senate bill, and that, but I am very confident we'll be able to work through those things, and we do have some areas of agreement as well. So I want to thank you for your continued dialogue as we move through this process.
Thank you.
Additionally,
Madam Chair.
I don't know if other members have questions. I do have a couple of questions, and we'll try to wrap this up real quick because we told Ways and Means we would have the room until 1:59. So So, Commissioner, I know one of the areas clearly that we've had some areas of disagreement is the voluntary pre-K program. And so in proposing to expand it further, and we've asked this question before, but have you been able to ascertain of the current, I think it's 3,300 students served, which of those students were not being served under one of the programs that we're funding, school readiness or otherwise, currently? And with the proposed expansion, how many of those students are not being served by another program? And how many of those students in the expansion area would be low income, so free or reduced price lunch children?
Madam Chair, as you know, we prioritize the voluntary pre-kindergarten applications that we had based on concentrations of poverty. And so many of the students who are in those programs are in them, with high concentrations of poverty, many above 80%. We heard you loud and clear that you want this data, and so my staff has been working to have ways of collecting that data. Many districts are doing 2 days or 3 days or all-day, half-day programs, and so we're trying to collect and survey districts to get that information.
Thank you, Commissioner. And again, from the proposed expansion in the governor's budget, we know right now that it's about 85% of the children in the first year of the voluntary pre-K that would qualify for free and reduced lunch. Their families would be of that income level, and 15 are presumably above that. Do you know of the proposed expansion, if that would be about the same percentage, if that would change? How targeted would this continue to be?
Well, Madam Chair, I think because it's 13,800 students, I could take a back-of-the-napkin guess at those kids. Obviously, they haven't showed up on our front door yet, so we wouldn't know. But the program is mostly for those high-poverty school districts. We have 269 charters in districts that have applied in every county of the state. The wonderful thing is now we would have preschool in every single county within the state if we were able to fund these options for our families. So we'll still be accounting for those numbers of how many are going to be free and reduced price lunch or not. We anticipate it'll be very reflective of our numbers this year. But as you know, we haven't closed our books on this year yet. So we'll get you those numbers as soon as we have them. It's the first year of the program. But the goal is to have that be for our highest poverty schools prioritized. And then as able, more schools to get into the program.
All right, thank you. I'll allow Senator Nelson. Yeah.
Actually, I see we're so short on time. We will discuss this later. But basically, I do think you've rightly identified the 4-year-old question. And I think that will be, the good news is we all realize how important it is that kids are ready for kindergarten when they get there. So we've come a long way in understanding the importance of that early learning. But there are different ways to get to the end result. And I took note of your statement that the governor wants to reach as many students as possible. And I think there are ways to do that and with targeted resources, and we'll look forward to discussing that when we have more time.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Erickson, or Representative Erickson, if you have a quick question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner, I have a question about American Indian education and the narrative that was provided in the governor's proposal in which you cited that these contract schools are private schools. So would you expand on that and explain then to what extent we're using dollars to support private schools? Because that's specifically the phrase that you used in the narrative in the governor's proposal. So would you comment on that? And to what extent there's accountability when we are funding private schools?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, I think the language was that they are like private schools, but they are publicly funded. They are tribal schools under the federal government and considered public schools. That might have been a drafting error on our part, and I apologize for that. As for accountability, they take all of the state exams. They are under the same federal accountability as any of our other schools, and so they are held accountable that way.
And Representative Erickson,
Madam
and I'll
Chair,
have to let this be the last
Just a
word.
short follow-up, but it's come to my attention that the MCA scores are not published, at least not readily available to those parents of the students who attend these contract schools. So we must ensure that that accountability is readily available to these parents of these students if we're going to continue down this path. And I do think, Commissioner, that you need to also check using what I talked to the governor about several years ago, means testing. I happen to have a very wealthy tribe, the Blacks Band, and they are so generous in funding their school, their Nashing schools. So I'm not sure why we are providing funding for a very wealthy tribe that already spends actually more than my public school does in Princeton in their budget. So I want you to consider those thoughts before we proceed.
Commissioner.
Thank you. I don't think that she needed a response.
All right, thank you. And we are at time, members. So, Commissioner, thank you so much for your time. I hope you'll be able to join us again as your schedule allows.
This week, yep.
And members, tomorrow, the Senator Nelson will have the gavel, but we will be meeting in this room. This will be our constant room for meeting, and the meeting is set for 1 o'clock tomorrow. All right. So with that, for today, we are adjourned.